What do you do when you're faced with life's transitions? Or those scary moments? And I'm not talking about the Sunday scaries when you suddenly find yourself with not much to do and you're wandering around with, oh my God, what do I do? I mean those impending moments where you're like, oh my God, life is massively changing, and how do I react? I think for many of us, there's the typical act like a deer in the headlights, where you just freeze and you don't know what to do. Some people find themselves to be very reactive. Sometimes people lose their temper even as their patience dwindles, because the truth is, when our brains, which are only so big, are filled this way with contemplating, ruminating, and stuck on some very scary or negative thoughts, we only have this much space to actively contemplate what's going on around us. Which is why I think in the Bible it says repeatedly, Al Tirah, do not be fearful. God urges us not to be fearful. It says, when Abraham sets out in uncharted territory, God reassures him with protection and tells him Al Tirah. When Hagar is about to wander into despair, an angel comes down and calls out Al Tirah, have no fear, and rescues her son Ishmael from thirst and near death. When Isaac sets out from the security of his home and doesn't know where the road may lead, God says, Al Tirah, and reasserts the blessing that Abraham had received. When the elderly Jacob prepares to go down into Pharaoh's palace to be reunited with his son Joseph after 20 years, again we see the words, Al Tirah, do not fear. In every generation, whether it was from Ruth to David to Daniel and so forth, our ancestors have been encouraged with the words, Al Tirah, do not be fearful, for I am with you, God says. And yet most of us don't necessarily even react that way. In this week, we're told that we are supposed to bring gifts of our heart as we are so moved to do. And what I've often understood that to mean is that God expects us to bring gifts. God expects us to participate. And those gifts are very detail-oriented and described at great length, how they're to be turned into the ark, the Holy of Holies, and what happens. What's fascinating is we see a few chapters later that the people, when they were confronted with the golden calf, Aaron tells them to pirku, to tear off their very earrings. They are supposed to abandon it in a frenzied fashion. We can only imagine what was going on. In one instance, Moses is instructed to carefully, laboriously, and slowly build. Why? Well, the rabbis teach us that God is supposed to have superior or profound power and order the chaos that occurs around us. And that when we join, and I think the idea of us doing so of our heart, of our own free will, is that when we do that and we willfully lean in, we're able to participate and experience what it's like to have God controlling the chaos. An image that I like to think about is that we can either choose to be the waves going up and down in the vicissitudes of life, or we can give of our own free hearts and sink into the ocean that sits underneath us and swim around and see the fish and feel a divine connection. Alternatively, when we think about why it was that the Israelites built the calf, we see that in a way Aaron is telling everybody, abandon their allegiance to God. Moses is on the mountain and we are all scared. And our response to being abandoned by God, or feeling that we're abandoned by Moses, is to turn around and abandon God and run away. It sounds almost like a childlike response, very reactive response. Though I have to admit myself, I've seen and maybe even done that if they're not going to like me, I'm not going to like them, and I'm just going to go away. And I don't know if you've ever done that one before. But the sources are very specific in all of this, when it reminds us again and again and again, it's going to be okay. Al tir'eh, don't be fearful. When we pray and worship together in community, we can construct things together that can get us through those difficult times. We will construct the tabernacle. We will do so in a way that everybody is able to give something and everybody is able to benefit. But if we sit in our fear and we find ourselves turning away from God, then suddenly we're abandoning the community. We're separating ourselves, and we're finding ourselves deeply isolated and alone. And we're in that place of loneliness, unlike the readings from earlier tonight where Walt Whitman described seeing miracles and Tolkien talked about roads and feeling that connection underneath. We're isolated, we're turned off, and we're even further alone, unable to see miracles, unable to appreciate the gifts that are around us, and unable to find deep connection. So I think maybe we get into all of this detail of building the tabernacle because it's imperative that we remember to work collectively together. But first we have to give of our heart willfully. And the only way we can do that is al tir'eh, don't be fearful. The phrase, of course, is repeated so often that biblical scholars have taken it to be a common expression even of deep reassurance. But Maimonides insists it's one of the 365 commandments. It's not about deep reassurance, it's about an active insistence that we choose to respond in a specific way. That we're not like the waves going up and down, that we're finding deep connection, and we're recognizing that in there the divine can overcome the chaos, and we don't need to be fearful. It's not to say that bad things won't happen. It's not to say that we won't find life's challenges challenging or scary, or that transitions can't be hard. It's simply reminding us that we don't have to respond as if we are alone and isolated and separate. Rather, that we are collectively present for one another and able to join hands and be together. Shabbat Shalom.